industry. So just see our net is our first example of the global policies of the with a lot of very fascinating presentations. So I give the floor to Zhao and Alexandre who will moderate this. Okay. That one. Oh, okay. This is a very cheap place. So, since I'm from Nanterre, okay, it's not super fancy. So, hello everyone, my name is Alexandre. I am a subject professor in information and data sciences at the Università Nanterre. I'm also a digital university scholar, but I'm not talking about digital university today. I chair this wonderful panel entitled The Global Geopolitics, Big Tech. So today we will have four presenters, four papers, okay, 5 presenters. So we will organize this panel like that. We will ask each comics to present their works together. So each one will have 20 minutes to present your work. I will give you some of them, 80 minutes kind of class. And then after all the presentation, we will open the stage for the discussion. Exactly, everyone can enjoy our debates. So our first presenter will be Françoise Daucé. She will present the word of the Greek game, how video game serves map Eastern Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you for inviting me to present today my research. I will present a work in progress. It's a new research for me, and I thank you in advance for any comment you will have about this new topic. The aim of this presentation is to open up a new field of research into the political, social, and technical issues concerning video games in Eastern Europe and Russia in the context of large-scale aggression against Ukraine. When we speak about big tech, we don't think first and foremost about the video game industry. But I won't come back to what said Ilan this morning about the problem of definition of what is big tech or not. The field of video game studies, I wanted to underline, is very inspiring to discuss geopolitical and security debates that are currently taking place in societies affected by armed conflict and political crisis. Video games bring together millions of players around the world, and the political issues they raise deserve attention. The video game industry is currently one of the most profitable, dynamic, and widely consumed industries. It is closely integrated into the world of big tech. I wanted to give you some examples. Epic Games, which is the editor of Fortnite, is an American video game studio, but it is 40% owned by Chinese internet giant Tencent, for example. In 2023, Microsoft acquired the Activision Blizzard studio, which is the editor of Call of Duty and Candy Crush. And if some major studios such as Riot Games or Ubisoft remain independent, they generate large financial profits and they collaborate, of course, with big techs. The social sciences are more and more interested in video game studies and their multiple issues. There is no vast bibliography about video game in contemporary societies. Of course, what I show on the screen is absolutely not exhaustive, so I just wanted to give you some references. Some of these academic works are based on the post-colonial and decolonial epistemologies and discuss European-centric representations in video games. They reveal the many inequalities that populate the world of video games and even suggest some of them to decolonize video games. I wanted to give you the example of the book by Philip Penningstatsen, Video Games and the Global South, which proposes a critical and decolonial reading of video games and shows that spaces often considered as tech peripheries are also, in fact, places where original and unique technologies develop. And this has led some theorists to advocate the creation of, I quote, video games of the oppressed as a means of education and raising political awareness. And the book highlights forms of resistance to the Eurocentric values of games. Of course, we are here very far from Eastern Europe. So what about Ukraine and Eastern Europe in these debates? Since February 2022, Russia's massive war of aggression against Ukraine has also given rise to new reflections on Russia's colonial domination on Ukraine. There is now a vast body of work mobilizing decolonial epistemology to explain the war in Ukraine. I give you here some, the two first references are in these kind of works. While Eastern Europe and the post-Soviet space have long remained outside post-colonial debates, the latter have gradually emerged in recent years and have developed considerably since Russia's aggression. New conceptual frameworks are emerging that denounce Russia's colonial hold over its near neighbors. These reflections give rise to a double criticism. A criticism against Russian domination on near abroad countries on one side, and of the international actors that reproduce the dominant centrality of Russia in the post-Soviet space on the other side. So what we face is what some scholars consider as inter-imperiality, so a double imperial gaze on the post-Soviet countries. How can video game studies contribute to these debates? So you have here on the slide two references to Jacob Lassin and Svetlana Ryabovol works, which raise the questions of vernacular geopolitics through video games in Ukraine, and also this problem studied by Svetlana Ryabovol, the problem of video games translation into the Ukrainian language. So we can see the rising of new topic of research about video games in Ukraine. I want today to discuss the case of the geographical and cultural debates about video game servers using League of Legends as an example. It will be my case study today. This is just one case study with its specific challenges. I could have used other examples of popular video games, but I choose this one because I consider it's a heuristic for discussion today. For the moment, my work is based mostly on an ethnography of online discussions about video game in Russian and in Ukrainian on YouTube, and on preliminary interviews, so I work mostly with qualitative data. The empirical example of the League of Legends game is very enlightening in this sphere. Servers of League of Legends are organized according to geographical zones, and that's why what I wanted to show you today. In the case of League of Legends, there are 12 servers managed directly by Riot Game around the world, to which must be added those that have been outsourced in China and Southeast Asia. This geography of servers is important because it determines the communities of players who play together. And of course, it's preferable to play on the server in the nearest zone to avoid latency, even if you can play on a server further away too. When a player registers in a so-called auto mode, the application selects the region with the best latency. The choice of server is based on the computer's IP address and is therefore invisible to the player. And here you have the maps of the servers of League of Legends. In League of Legends case, the European territory is organized around 3 servers. Western Europe, and the server is in Amsterdam. Eastern Europe, the server is in Frankfurt. And Russia, and the server for the Russian players is in Stockholm. Riot Games dedicated a separate server for what is called the CIS, the Community of Independent States, in 2013, so about 10 years ago. Until 2013, most Russian users played in the Eastern and Northern European region. But in 2013, players were offered to move to the new server, to the Russian server, for free. What is interesting here is that this mapping considers that Ukraine belongs to the post-Soviet space, to the CIS, as can be seen from the map showing the distribution of players by server. So if you consider this blue map, so you have Russia, of course, but you have also the Baltic states, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, the Caucasus states, and the Central Asian states. I was showing this map about how is organized, how organized servers and how do they map geographically the community of players. And I was insisting on the fact that the map it's called the map for Russia, the Russian server. But on the Russian server, you have also the Baltic states, all these post-Soviet countries. And for a long time, this distribution of players remained invisible or unproblematic until Russia's military aggression against Ukraine unveiled the geopolitical stakes of the existing organization. So now, il marche plus sur l'écran. Voilà. Okay, thank you. Sorry for these technical problems. Since 2014 and 2022, so the geographical organization of servers has led to criticism from some Ukrainian players who no longer recognize themselves in the organization of the game, its languages, and its regional groupings. I wanted to show you this message from a player, an Ukrainian player on Reddit, which deplores the absence of Ukraine on Riot Games servers, which forces Ukrainians to play on the Russian server. Following his message, he published a map with a question mark over Ukraine, you can see on the map. In the context of large-scale political confrontation, the structuring effects brought about by video games infrastructures are revealed by the players themselves, by ordinary players, who are no longer satisfied with the usually accepted regional and linguistic divisions. The discussion shows the existence of critical sensibilities among Ukrainian gamers who are demanding the right to exist on the video game map. And I wanted to show you this second example. You have a question in Ukrainian at the top, how to change server from Russian to EU West for free. In 2023 on YouTube, Ukrainian players were looking how to leave the Russian server and migrate to the Western European server. And 2 tutorials are available in Ukrainian to explain how to migrate. And I wanted to quote you this later from an Ukrainian gamer who wrote, "Hello Riot, I live in Ukraine and I am about to transfer my account to another server. Can I ask you to do this? Why? There is a war in my country now, we are attacked by Russia, and when playing League of Legends, I constantly hear statements about my country and about me and my identity. It offends me, I don't want to play with people whose country is killing people in my country. Ukraine has recently become a candidate for European membership, and I really want to move to another server, preferably EU West, because I am tired of hearing insults from other players. I think you will be able to help me." So this is ordinary comments appearing on YouTube and which show the reflexivity, the growing reflexivity of Ukrainian players facing game industry and the game infrastructures. And I will come to my conclusion. In April 2022, 2 months after Russia's large-scale aggression against Ukraine, Olesia Khomeyshuk, who is an historian and writer, director of the Ukrainian Institute in London, asked this uncomfortable question. And her question was, where is Ukraine on the mental map of the academic community? Addressing the scientific audience of the annual conference of the British Association for Slavonic and East European Studies in Cambridge, she underlined that Ukraine has existed on the map of Europe for 30 years but has been denied a historiographical existence. According to her, this has set the stage for Putin's rhetoric. Ukraine is either too European or too Soviet. Among Ukrainian video game players, of course, the discussion is not framed in the academic terms of the post-colonial debate, but what they say themselves on this, what I showed, shows the existence of critical sensibilities among Ukrainian gamers who are demanding the right to exist on the video game map. Ukrainian gamers are contributing to the unveiling of the geopolitical imaginaries carried by the video game industries, and they are seeking to emancipate themselves by developing vernacular decolonial arguments. This is my conclusion. Thank you for your attention.
So let's move on to the next presenter, Nowmay Opalinski, who will present his research on content delivery platform data storage practice of intended foreign knowledge on emerging internet residents, the data on Pakistan.
Yeah, okay. So I just have to share the screen. Non, non, c'est bon.
T'as dû finir un
Ouais,
peu à côté.
ouais, ça.
Ouais, c'est juste
Ouais.
là.
C'est bon. Ok. Merci. Et après, si je veux l'afficher.
Et après, c'est là. Mode lecture.
Ok. Ça y est.
Okay, great.
Hello, yes, it is. Hello everyone, so my name is Nowmay Opalinski. I'm a PhD candidate from Paris State University, so actually in Saint-Denis, so in the north of Paris. I'm working with the French Institute of Geopolitics and the research project called GEODE, Geopolitics of the Datasphere. So we are working on a specific project which looks at how to map the internet and how the geography of the internet is impacted by politics. We are also conducting a research with counterparts in Pakistan, so I'm part of this research project. It's part of my PhD project also, which is called EPIC, Exploring Pakistan's Internet Connectivity. We are working with computer scientists from Lahore University of Management Sciences. So that's part of the research I did on the ground in Pakistan. And today we will talk about the issue of how big tech's own network planning can impact emerging countries' internet resilience through the case study of Pakistan. So to start, when I started my field investigations in Pakistan and I was talking about the internet infrastructure there, everybody was asking me a question. So what about those sharks eating submarine cables? Every time, like, our network is just being impacted by issues we don't really understand, and everybody was asking me about this problem. And by digging into the interviews and the fieldwork, I understood that one of the issues Pakistan is facing is that contents that common users in Pakistan are using daily are actually hosted outside of the country. And we have seen such an issue in March 2023 in 13 Western African countries were impacted by a network outage on 4 submarine cables, and the cut was not repaired in enough time, and they had like network downgrade for more than 1 week. In Pakistan, this kind of issue happened a lot. Like in 2017, their operations of Pakistan International Airlines, so the national airline company, were impacted during 1 week because of the submarine cable cut in Jeddah. In 2022, the country experienced 6 major submarine cable cuts with, again, network downgrade. So that's a big problem, especially when you know that 70% of the traffic of Pakistan's local domestic internet is going to content delivery providers. So that's kind of the scope of the issue we are going to study today. So the research questions we will try to answer today are: how does the content delivery platform's own data storage practices have an impact on the resilience of Pakistan's internet? What does this tell us about the power asymmetry between platforms and internet service providers, and also platforms and state institutions in emerging countries? This reflection builds upon a lot of different work, especially the work that academics did on how local governments are trying to rescale their state control through territorialization strategy. So asking platforms to locate their data on their national territory. And we will look at how the Pakistani government is trying to do that and the issue it raises. And also looking at how Grumbach and Zana talked about the different categories of states and how do they interact with platforms. Pakistan and also European countries standing in what we could call dependent states, whose regulatory power are overshadowed by foreign platforms, which is different, for example, in China, or it tends to be in Russia or in the US, where government there have a power to get platforms hosting their data on the national soil. So we can understand the internet as a social technical construct, and the way data is being routed within the internet is also impacted about this different social technical construct and the way different stakeholders interact. I'm also using the methodology that people from my lab and my PhD supervisor developed, which try to map the roots of the internet, and we will see a little bit of that kind of work just after. So the key findings of my research, we can say that I have three key findings. Pakistani's ISP's international connectivity choices are driven by the demand for overseas hosted content, resulting in an over-reliance on submarine cable connectivity. Content delivery network data storage plans in India are at odds with Islamabad security concerns. And the Pakistani government is trying to draw new alternatives for alternative path in its neighborhood with China, but it also has its own limitations. So what did I do to find these different results? So I had to map the infrastructure. So we were talking about infrastructure yesterday. Internet is based on the mesh of cables, servers, and you have a real physical space within the internet. So you need to understand where do you have the cables, where do you have the internet exchange points to understand how the internet works. Then on top of that, you have a logical architecture, which means that the data which flows through these different physical links have their own way of going through one way or another. This is being managed through a protocol called the Border Gateway Protocol. I will explain a little bit more about that just after. And looking at the different agreements between networks enable us to understand how is the network actually going. So when you connect from one IP address to another in the world, what path your data is actually taking, okay? So, so we first looked at Pakistan's internet architecture through network measurements. And after, from that mapping, we understood which players are the most important in the country, which internet service providers are actually making the international connectivities between Pakistan and the outside world. So after I went to Pakistan and I talked to the people who actually manage the network, so the people sitting at the international gateway. So yeah, I talked with PTCL and Transworld and also the authorities, the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. Before we go to Pakistan, I just want to precise briefly that now the internet is increasingly being, the flows of the internet are being increasingly concentrated around big platforms. According to Telegeography's 2023 annual report, about 69% of all used international capacity went to their infrastructure. So it's kind of huge. It depends from one region to another. But for example, if you take the transatlantic data flows, you have almost 90% or 95% of the capacity which goes to their nodes, mostly Google, Meta, etc. But the way this content delivery providers, so the providers which host the content that people will connect to, have a specific way of being interconnected, and each content provider will have different infrastructure all over the globe. That's what we talked about yesterday. I think Olivier Chatin explained that they were trying to link their data centers with submarine cables. And it's important to understand that they have two different kinds of infrastructure there. So first, you have content delivery networks. We call them also media CDNs. That's what we call content caches. That's mostly audiovisual contents that are hosted digitally on a data center or in a server. So for example, when you are sitting here and you want to connect to Netflix, we have some contents hosted in a night feed just nearby. So the connection we will have with a Netflix content will be quite fast because it's just near you. The problem is that in a lot of countries, sometimes CDNs are not hosted there, so the latency is much higher and the internet experience they gets impacted. Then you have points of presence, which are big infrastructure, like physical infrastructure, like big data centers, where this platform hosts what we call dynamic services. So it means, for example, when you do a video call through WhatsApp, you will have to interconnect sometimes to a distant data center. And the way these different providers plan and serve the users has a concrete impact on the usage and the internet experience. So the way they plan the network, you can find these maps. For example, this is the map of Google for Google Cloud Services. So they have the little points in gray are the CDNs, so the caches, and after you have what they call the 24 cloud regions. So that's the points of presence. That's big infrastructure. So they choose different geographies according to their own market interest, and also according to the infrastructure available in the country, and also about the regulations in the region. And what you can see in that in South Asia and Middle East and even Africa in general, you have you do not have so much big pops, which creates issues in terms of latency and also internet resilience. So now the methodology we use to understand Pakistan's network before going there. So we mapped what we call the autonomous systems. So it means like every network in the internet has its own policy. So it could be a university network, a bank network, or a government network. And so they have to define policies on how they exchange data with other networks within the internet. And this has to go through the Border Gateway Protocol, BGP protocol. So EHESS administrators, they sign partnerships agreements, and you can map actually those agreements. So without going into too much detail about this methodology, we can talk about this later. That's how the Pakistani network looks when we apply some specialization algorithm to the BGP feeds between these systems. And what we see when we look at this network is that you have two main points that are actually the points of control of the network. And so Pakistan's internet is very concentrated, which means that most of the country's broadband has to go through these 2 points to interconnect to the outside world. And that's what you see in the second picture, where you see all the agreements between Pakistani EHESSs with foreign systems. And you see that these 2 points, so PTCL and Transworld, actually connect the whole country. This is because they own the submarine cable systems. And this makes it easier also for the Pakistani government to apply some kind of DNS filtering and deep packet inspection and to monitor the contents. Which this kind of network is very different, for example, from another country in the region. I don't know why it's bugging, sorry. Yeah, so if you look at Bangladesh, which used to be part of Pakistan, you see that the network of Bangladesh doesn't have anything to do because the government doesn't have such a controlling way of engaging with ISPs in Bangladesh. So the way they have agreements with other countries is much different and it's much less controlled. So in Pakistan, we have another concentrated network, and everything has to go through these two ISPs. So to do field work, it was kind of easier because we just had to go through these two stakeholders. So I went to Karachi and talked with the people managing the international gateway. And it was very interesting because what they told me when I was asking about these submarine cable cuts and how could they manage it, they said that for them, they didn't have so much choice. Actually, all of their traffic, or most of their traffic they have to manage, has to go to Western Europe or Singapore, because that's the two edges where you have important internet exchange points and where you have content. So whenever you have a cut on the submarine cables connecting these two extremities, Pakistan's network is being impacted. So most of the cuts which are impacting Pakistan's network happen in the Red Sea or next to Egypt, also in the Bay of Karachi and next to Singapore. But the big problem is Egypt mostly, because it's a big hub for the whole Asia-Europe transit. So what was interesting, when I talked with them, they said that they didn't have actually any option on the short term, and they just have to rely on these different locations. So what is interesting also is that you have kind of a post-colonial geography of the infrastructure there, and a lot of countries still depend on contents being hosted in Europe, and that's also the case in Africa. And so when I talked to them, they explained that what they try to do daily is that they try to outreach to the different content service providers and asking them to host part of their contents in Pakistan. So they have managed from some part of the contents, but not for the points of presence, the big hubs. And they explained that there are different reasons for that. Is that first, they don't see a commercial option in Pakistan. They see that the regulatory environment is not that interesting. And also they say that it's difficult for them to outreach to the platform. So actually the platform don't come to them. They have to go to them and ask them to put infrastructure in the country so they have better connectivity. And that's a kind of a hustle for them. So for example, I know that Amazon's refused to set foot in Pakistan because they said that there might be also some international issues. Another problem to that is that these platforms, so you look at, this is the Google infrastructure, these platforms are using India as their work base for the whole region. So now they have invested heavily in India. And so when a country in South Asia asks them to set foot in Pakistan, they would say, no, but just connect to India. But in Pakistan, this is forbidden. It's not in the law, it's not written, but they are forbidden to interconnect to India and to Israel. So this creates a lot of frustrations on the Pakistani side. They say that they are a country of 230 million inhabitants. Why wouldn't they matter, you know? And so this was just for the Amazon, also how they plan the network. So you have kind of an asymmetry of power between the platforms and the ISPs. Also at the government side, the government of Pakistan during Imran Khan's tenure tried to impose harsh rules on the platforms. So they tried to adopt a law called the Citizens Protection Against Online Harm Rules. And they asked all the big platforms, which had more than 500,000 users in Pakistan, to settle an office in the country, to host their citizens' data within Pakistan, and also to understand the religious, cultural, ethnic, and national security sensitivities of Pakistan. They also asked that any content that would be asked from the security agencies would be given to them in decrypted, readable, and comprehensible formats. They also said that if the companies didn't comply, they would be fined and they couldn't work in the country anymore. So what happened is that the lobby of this platform, the Asia Internet Coalition, responded to the government and threatened them that if they would go that way, they would stop their services in the country. So finally, the government didn't have any choice and had to backtrack. So they didn't enact the law. But so when you look at Pakistan's internet
connectivity in the region, Pakistan doesn't have so much options. Actually, with Iran, it has a direct physical link, but it's not being used because of US sanctions. Afghanistan is buying broadband from Pakistan, but it's not like, it wouldn't give any other connectivity options. With India, they have a physical connection, but it's not being used. And so China is an option. And so they have built a fiber optic cable with China. And the Pakistani government was saying, okay, now we will have a backup if the submarine cable breaks. This goes fine. But the ISPs, when I went to talk to them, they told me, actually, we won't use the China cable. And I said, why? It could be a backup. No, but China doesn't host this content we are using. So what's the point of connecting to China? I mean, they do not have any Google nodes. They don't have any meta nodes. So even if the Pakistani government wants to create new alternatives and building digital bridges with friendly countries, they are limited. So the only option they have remains in the Gulf, and they are building more and more infrastructure towards the UAE, Oman, and also Saudi Arabia, which is coming with a new policy and is trying to become a new node and crossroads in the region. So what is interesting is that now countries are trying to attract platforms so they become themselves crossroads within the internet. So you see how this asymmetry of power can be also used by different actors, and also within the Pakistani context, you have this kind of thing. Thank you.
Move on to the third presentation. Okay. It will be by Margherita and Davide. They will present Jerusalem context, Israel, Palestine, and US attacking the Holy City.
Sorry. So we will present today our work on Jerusalem. Okay. That started 2 years ago from when we visited the country. It's still in the process, but we found interested to underline the Jerusalem context, and in the specific the year to 2021, because we found it as a key year to explain how a huge wave of protest of May then brought about the signing of many contracts between the Israeli state and Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. So the main hypothesis is how these big tech are acting as essential intermediaries between states, market, and civil institutions. And we find that this can be analyzed in two ways. From a bottom-up approach, we'll bring a case study of Sheikh Jarrah of 2021, which has been a huge wave of protests. The Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, occupied in 1967. And in May 2021, April 2021, 6 families were under the threat of eviction from the Israeli Supreme Court decision. And this fostered a great wave of protest that used social media and Google, Twitter, and Meta especially as practices of re-territorialization. what was called the Unity Intifada. On the other hand, from a top-down perspective, since 2021, there's been a huge rising in the surveillance technologies, especially for AI recognition, vocal recognition, and artificial intelligence recognizing emotions of the Palestinians, crossing these spaces in Jerusalem. Methodologically speaking, we mainly base our research on the NGOs and researches and records such as Amnesty International. For the first part, directly digging into Twitter and Instagram of Mohammed and Muna Al-Qur, which were the two main their city journalism, so people living in the neighborhood, that brought about this huge wave of protest. And for the second part, especially the Amnesty International report called Automated Apartheid of 2023. Jerusalem is a place of religious significance for Muslim and Jewish people, just to give a little bit of context. And since its occupation in 1976, Israel has sought to reduce the Palestinian geographical interdependence, particularly with the occupied city of Jerusalem, in order to establish a coherent Israeli settlement entity, pursuing a demographic balance of 70% Jewish population in the urban municipality of the Holy City. So since then, the Palestinians living in the Arab enclave of Olden in Jerusalem has become subject to the fear of losing the state purpose, as this is the case for the two brothers of Sheikh Jarrah. According to Amnesty International, the sentiment of perpetual threat and a priori guilt has been strengthened by the Israeli politics of surveillance infrastructure since 2021, with one camera every 125 people in all Jerusalem and one camera every 5 meters in East Jerusalem. The system of Mabat is in place, which is a surveillance system of Jerusalem, existing since 2000, but after 2021, it was increasingly strengthened with AI facial recognition. So this technology is not only having an impact on the emotional feeling of the Palestinian living there, but it's transforming the landscape of East Jerusalem. As Israeli security forces, they monitor specific places such as the Damascus Gate, which is the mainly entrance for people entering the Holy City, and Sheikh Jarrah, so the neighborhood and close to the gate, which are used also for people to gather and protest. It has a social meaning. This is just an example of the neighborhood of Silwan, close to Sheikh Jarrah. It was one also of the neighborhood of, under the threat of forced eviction in 2021. Is very small little white dots showing the camera surveillance in 2008, and then the red dots of 2023. So we can see how it spread the technology of surveillance. And in the meantime, we have the area of colors, orange and red of the rising settlement until 2023. So we can see a correlation between surveillance technology and rising settlement. So in 2021, the decision of the Israeli Supreme Court to bring about the forced eviction of 6 families from the Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan neighborhood compounded a wave of political protest and movement fostered by online activists and citizen journalism of the neighborhood. I'm bringing the Twitter as a case from Mohammed Al-Qud and Muna Al-Qud. They are brothers. They saw in 2009 half of their home taken by a settler, and in 2021 they were under threat of eviction of the whole house. So they played a great role in creating this campaign and hashtag campaign Save Sheikh Jarrah. First of all, by telling their personal stories and then involving people from the neighborhood and outside the neighborhood. Yeah, these are some examples of posts from Twitter that are just not calling for a storm campaign online, but actually inviting people in presence to be present daily in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. And we see here tomorrow at the entrance of the towns, calling for mass mobilization. This was in April, March and April, and in May, the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah was declared under no media could enter the neighborhood. It was declared to be under siege by the Israeli police. And we can see here how, again, by being inside the neighborhood, when no media was allowed to enter, the fact that citizen journalists were inside, they were able to actually tell the stories from the inside. So, for example, Al Jazeera was coming in contact with the people inside the neighborhood because of the impact of social media. I think this is a very explicative tweet by Mohammed Al-Pour, like, remember, you control the news cycle, the content, your rage, what you force the world to talk about, so keep talking about Palestine, Gaza, Sheikh Jarrah. In the meantime, violence escalated. In 2021, there was a confrontation between Gaza and Israel, and which caused also 255 people were killed in Gaza, and 26 people were killed in West Bank, and 30 people were killed in Israel. This huge wave of protest has been called later as the Unity Intifada. I think it is interesting also to call it unity, and then the impact that social media had in united people despite the physical borders. So it was led by a young generation of Palestinians, actually, like citizen journalists, like normal people, just seeing what was happening and fighting, organized outside traditional political structures. Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp, they played a key role for alerting people about where police and settlers were carrying out attacks, and for organizing events and protests, while Instagram was crucial in raising awareness internationally, as well as unifying Palestinians beyond physical borders. Muna Al-Kurd said, we feel social media is the only way left to get attention. Every post, tweet, video makes a difference. This is how we reach out to the masses of people and governments around the world. After that, of course, as it has been reported by 7 outlets, there's been a great shutdown of profiles of these social media of these activists. Mohammed Al-Kurd and Muna Al-Kurd, they were both arrested, both their profiles were shut down, then reopened thanks to the 7 outlet report. They reported 500 censored profiles, 50% from Instagram, 35% from Facebook, 11% Twitter, and 1% on TikTok. Instagram on May the 8th blamed technical errors for deleting the post. This did not just happen in Palestine, but it happened also in Colombia and in the indigenous community at the same time. On March 11, Israeli intelligence sent a text message to the worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, informing that they were being classified as participants in violence in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they were held accountable. At the same time, they also contacted these Palestinians and treated them with arrest and trial in case they did not remove their documents and posts on social media platforms regarding the Israeli police violence against them. So this shows also the connection between the intelligence, Israeli intelligence use of GPS and their contact with the social media companies, as in the May the 13th, Israeli Minister of Justice and Defense met with Facebook and TikTok executive, asking for the removal of Palestinian content, which incites violence and spread disinformation. That was also a case of violence that spread on both sides online. The fact is that this intensified censorship. So underlining the Meta was completely unable to deal with this conflict, and the Israeli cyber unit was asking proactively Facebook to removing content. It was given the green light by the Supreme Court in 2021 to operate, let's say, in the dark. So removing posts without consultation with the users and without further documentation about it. On May the 20th, Facebook finally set up a special operational center to monitor content on its platform about the escalation Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So this shows how it's not just users that can shape the how platform interact, but also the opposite way. Not just the platform have an impact of how people interact, in the case escalating violence, organizing protests, but also the other way around. So Facebook in 2021, he said, we will open a special operations center. So something is not working. And we can also underline the fact that Facebook DIO, so dangerous individuals and organization, is really connected to the American foreign policies after 9/11. So the list of dangerous organizations and individuals, let's say it's according to the Intercept, it's like a list of anxieties from the American policy. In the 1st of June, Facebook owned Instagram and made changes also to its algorithm after 200 employees signed an open letter complaining that pro-Palestinian content was not viewable for users during the conflict in Gaza. So again, we have this social media platform trying to respond to a case of violence of two parties asking for more digital rights, and at the same time trying to not to make violence escalating. So this, I think, is shows the relationship between users and platforms. And after 2021, and then refer to Davide, also mainly because of the Sheikh Jarrah cases and protests, many contracts have been signed between Israeli government and Google, Microsoft, and others.
We're sorry we forgot to present ourselves. Margherita works with the UN, and me, I'm doing a PhD in global studies. And I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of an allergic crisis that we are seeing due to dogs and cats. So we took the 2021 as a critical key point because we observed that there was an increase of FRT's technologies. FRT technologies are facial recognition technologies, and also artificial intelligence technologies who can define the vocal expressions, the sentiments, the emotions of the people. Actually, this kind of technologies have been trained, especially with the European Union border externalization in the Balkans. I'm part of another research who have been studying this phenomenon in the Balkan corridor. So we are tremendous. So this is the context, the surveillance context of Jerusalem. We can go to the next slide. We access to 200 pages of proprietary and confidential documents between Israel and Google. I'm very sorry. Next one. Next one. We link our work to previous one because this project is a project Nimbus, project of 2 data centers, one of Amazon, the other of Google, is linked to the cable, the fiber optic cable called Urbino, Italy to India. We have to underline that there is a military agreement between the Italian Minister of Defense and Google and the partnership with an Italian telecommunication platform. The cable is made to bypass Egypt because, as you can see, it's a critical node. Next one. This is a data center in close to Tel Aviv of Amazon. Next one. And in the document, we saw and we test the technology they have been using to facially recognize the expression of the people. These are not scientific data. These are artificial intelligence things. But it's useful to see how does it work because next one. Because actually Project Nimbus was a contract of 2021. In the contract, as the Gats stated, the extraterritoriality of the cloud region of Google and Amazon permitted to Israel to retrieve the data in the case of boycotts and investigations by the International Criminal Court. This is 2021 contract. The next one, because it is a double. Okay. No. Okay. No, I don't think that's actually we can arrive to our days because actually this kind of technologies are the same who have been doing a list of previous people in the West Bank and in Gaza, and these are lists of almost 37,000 people, actually not very scientifically cataloged, because there was actually a training of these technologies on between 2021 and now. Next one. The soldiers, the IDF had 20 seconds per target to decide say yes or no to the targeting list. We're talking about bombs. Actually, the system of Levante was linked to the system of Where is Daddy? Where is Daddy is a software that can trace the GPS of the targets. and try to collocate try to selection the target when they turn on. Actually, in this case, we can see that the majority of people who were hit were actually families. So this can explain the absolute number of civilians, absolute number of children and women killed. So as for the conclusion, we can of course say that big tech are trying to I don't know, working as states. I don't know. Actually, when we before talk about the big tech involvement in wars, we rightly understood that this was for profit. Actually, I think that we are, how to say, we are witnessing the ability to create extraterritorial spaces, because it's within these priorities that the entanglement between the states and the big tech are solving. Yeah, I think that having a long view of this kind of relationship can help to further understand on the topic. Grazie.
Let's move forward to our last presentation from Emilie V de Keulenaar. She's presentation will focus on normative is location. She will analyze how resident militarism was left unmoderated or moderated throughout the resident election of 2022. So Emilie, the floor is yours.
Hello. Let's see. This is it, right? Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, nice to meet you indirectly through this panel. Also very happy to be here under these honorable men with Louis XIV showing his sexy legs. Okay, so I think that to begin, also in connection to how Zhao presented the paper, briefly, is that what is interesting so far about studies that have to do more or less with big tech and content moderation is that, generally speaking, there seem to be a number of framings in which those two topics appear to be analyzed. So the first one, for example, is mostly deontological, right? So it's a question of what should or should not big tech moderate on the basis of which legal standards. The second is a question of speech rights, which is particularly important in the United States. So does big tech tramp on existing civil or constitutional speech rights, and if so, how? Or also what we talked about yesterday, particularly with Nada's presentation. Or in the case of more institutional framing, so what kind of proto-institution, if you will, is big tech, or what kind of institution is it emerging to be in the way that it competes with state powers? But the interesting thing with moderation is that, especially when one looks at censorship studies that tend to look into censorious practices from a much longitudinal perspective, there's a case to be made about the fact that moderation is a much longer practice in history in various ways. So in liberal democracies in particular, there's a case to be made that from the 21st or 20th century onwards, moderation practices, which may encompass censorship in that sense, it is a sort of censorious practice, has largely reduced and trying to consisted in reducing the reach of problematic information, however that is defined, by trying to use censorship as least as possible, but perhaps use other techniques that are very visible today in social media platforms, such as maybe countering problematic information or marginalizing it or obfuscating it or embargoing it in a given public sphere. And I'll give you a number of examples of what that is about. So then the follow-up question is, of course, what is problematic information? I mean, that's like a Pandora's box. But perhaps it's not so much what they're about or what they say. I mean, of course, that is very much historically determined, but it's more how they sort of bump against historically determined boundaries of acceptable norms of public culture that are historically determined, as I said. So in Western Europe in particular, we might think of problematic information as being objectionable in some days or not others. There are things that become problematic today, but were not yesterday, and vice versa. But there are other things that are really considered systematic threats in the sense that they might disrupt fundamental historical consensus or norms. And these might be censored by law. So here in France in particular, and in Germany even more, there are laws against historical revisionism relating to the Holocaust. Or in Germany, there is a lot of protections against Nazi insignia or expressions of political extremism, particularly hate speech, that have potential to lead to genocidal harm. And now that we see, particularly in Ukraine, in Eastern European countries, a lot of laws that are beginning to forbid expressions relating to Soviet history. So lots of Lenin statues that are abandoned in the streets or just used for other materials, or not a possibility to speak Russian anymore, and so on. So these are sort of, in a sense, could be considered part of transitional justice processes or nationalization processes that use moderation techniques to kind of protect the big normative core. And in this sense, if we take someone like Karl Popper, or people that ascribe to his theory, we can consider moderation as a sort of an instrument of democratic self-defense, right? So it's the famous theory of the paradox of tolerance. If you end up tolerating everything, then in the end, you won't have something like a coherent society, normatively or otherwise speaking. Of course, this theory has a lot of criticism, but that's one that is usually reused to be able to justify a number of censorious practices today. So then what happens with big tech? Well, of course, we know that there are a number of things that are not allowed or deplatformed by law. I still remember in the days of my teenagehood when I was using Skyblog. I'm not sure if anyone remembers here, but there was like a popular social media platform in France back then. And I was trying to put a picture of Hitler because it was a sort of a funny joke with a friend, a high school friend or something. But I couldn't, so they kept removing it. They didn't want the picture of Hitler. But of course, that's a funny example of a broader phenomenon where certain states enforce certain laws to prevent the demoralization of historically problematic language. And from a more technical perspective, big tech platforms have actually sort of continued a number of moderation practices that had already existed before in legacy media, however we define that, television, printed newspaper, and so on. So there is, as I said, the sanctioning of problematic language that today is spoken as deplatforming, or marginalizing problematic language, which is the equivalent of maybe, putting a little erotic ad on the last page of a newspaper so you don't really see it so easily, or broadcasting something in very late hours, is the equivalent of something like demotion, which is downranking problematic content over time, or confronting or denying problematic speech, which is a more popular technique in the United States. So it's what they call counter speech, and that's very popular in sort of, talk show hosts or radio programs and so on, could be considered the equivalent of context labels today. So the fact that in Twitter, that's particularly frequent. It's like those little context readers adding context and saying or correcting a certain information that appears to be too blatantly false or incorrect, and so on and so forth. But the most important thing here is that big tech is seen as, from a moderation perspective, a sort of destabilizing factor, in the sense that it either kind of moderates too much or too little. Too little in the sense that it has tended to give, as we know, a much bigger platform to actors that were gatekept by legacy media before, and these are mostly sort of far-right populist voices that we hear today. And so some like to classify this phenomenon as part of this sort of the Overton window theory. And at the same time, it also has facilitated a sort of democratization of censorship, in the sense that not only can platforms, especially in the US, determine their own speech norms, their own conditions under which language can be uttered or not, but they also facilitate the sort of the balkanization of different political communities with their own speech norms, or what's sort of colloquially called safe spaces in the United States. Now, the EU, as we know, is very responsive to these kind of destabilizations, and the Digital Service Act has, in a sense, introduced both technical adjustments and normative adjustments. Technical one includes flagging affordances. So if the platform doesn't allow you to flag something that you think is problematic, then now you may with the Digital Service Act. So there are a couple of UX adjustments that have been made on Twitter at this point, and I will refuse to call it X. Platforms also are obliged to explain why they remove what, so to add more context and justifications to content moderation decisions. And there are a number of additional measures for elections and so on. And that applies not only to what we call big tech platforms, or what the DSA calls very large online platforms, but also smaller ones that have users in the EU. So that could also include something like Telegram or 4chan, you know. So to get to the specific research questions, my interest was in understanding how this applies to Latin America. So the countries or regions that are usually not very much under the political interest of these platforms. That's particularly Brazil. So the specific empirical question I ask is, how have Twitter, Meta, and that is Instagram and Facebook, YouTube and Telegram, moderated content related to Brazilian militarism at the wake of the January 8th riots, so right after the elections of last year, 2003. Now, when we talk about transitional justice and the formation of speech norms thereafter, first we'd have to ask, what is there to transition from in Brazil? What is exactly the sort of the thing that speech moderation practices would like to counter or contain? Well, it was a military regime that lasted about 40 years, from 63 till 88, and it was accused of widespread exile or torture or extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances of about thousands of political dissidents. It had no direct elections and had reduced parliamentary capacities, and it has widespread censorship, amongst other things. And so the way that Brazil or the Brazilian state tried to sort of exit from that period was in a sort of cumbersome process that wasn't as clear as a sort of a TRC committee, or a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, or Transitional Justice Committee as in Argentina or Chile. But in this case was actually by using an amnesty law. And what was that about? The amnesty law was actually promulgated under the military dictatorship itself. And it consisted in giving, in sort of forgiving, sort of you scratch your back and I scratch mine. So forgiving both the political dissidents and the militaries for crimes, whatever those crimes were. And it didn't go so well. This cartoon was published at the time. I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but it's a cartoon that says, all right, opposition, you're surrounded, put your hands up for reconciliation. It felt a little bit forced for the dissidents in particular. Now, the new constitution puts in place democratic rule of law and speech laws that are colloquially called sort of communal speech laws. So there is respect for freedom of expression, but to the extent that that speech does not harm a number of communities. So that's based on race and gender, religious orientation, and so on and so forth. So a very classic understanding of it. What follows is a sort of a period of pacification. So first, one of the presidents of the time, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, was responsible for putting up all these different commissions to, let's say, forgive or repair relations with political dissidents. Then there was a truth commission that was put in place by Dilma Rousseff. Then she was impeached. And then there was the period that we know as more recently, that was more sort of dominated by a kind of more far-right Brazilian political discourse, particularly sort of presided by Jair Bolsonaro, where with the use of social media, certain kinds of political cultures and language have reemerged, which is sort of, let's say, a form of historical revisionism, military historical revisionism, according to which the kind of historical version that this period was trying to put into place is trying to rewrite. And in that process, Bolsonaro was accused of usurping his power in the sense of trying to overthrow, just like had happened in 1964 with the establishment of the military regime, overthrow the democratic rule of law, with various kinds of language and actions used online and offline. So at some point, this person that you see here, his name is Alexandre de Moraes. He's colloquially known as Xandão. He is the president, or he's one of the ministers of the federal Supreme Court, and he is also the president of there's a particular Supreme Court in Brazil called the Federal Electoral Court. So it's the Supreme Court that's responsible for regulating elections. He decides to take matters in his own hands, like the sheriff in town, and commands the deplatforming or moderation of various Bolsonarista, or let's say, what he would call anti-democratic agents on social media. So he tells these different platforms to deplatform all these different political personas. So what does this look like in practice? We don't need to go through every little detail, but since we were talking about method yesterday, I thought I would just show you a little bit what this would look like from the perspective of what we call digital methods, or more sort of data analysis oriented analysis. What this looks like is first I collected a lot of data from different social media platforms, from the most mainstream to the most fringe because that's where actors related to the riots of January the 8th were most were inhabiting. And I used their APIs, which for unfortunately today are becoming increasingly more unavailable. And I collected about from millions to hundreds of thousands of posts from each of those platforms with a number of keywords that are pronounced or used by, let's say, militaristic actors that were involved in the riots. And the most important thing is that I wanted to see the moderation. So moderation is a tricky thing to analyze because it's not available through the APIs. So one has to scrape it, which is a different technique than data collection, right? You have to copy information from the interface systematically. So I scraped the moderation statuses of a number of all these different posts over time. So I made sure that I got indications of deplatforming or flagging or whatever it is. So this is an example of what it looks like on Telegram for now, and I can zoom in a little bit if you can't see very well. But so this is a timeline where shortly before and after the riots of January the 8th. And of course, you don't have to pay attention to every little thing. It's a very sort of detailed V-swarm, but I'll guide you through it. The size of the nodes refers to engagement, which goes somewhere from 0 views all the way to 100,000 views. And the color of the nodes, the color of the little bubbles, is the content, the theme of the post. So the very dark red is calls for the January 8th riots, which was essentially a call to overthrow the government, so a call for a coup d'etat. And earlier in December, it was more strikes in support of a military intervention or things generally about general military intervention. And in yellow, it's more things about claims of election fraud. And the circle around it is the moderation status. So everything that's green was at the time of data collection, which was January 8th, online. And everything that was orange was actually self-censored. So it was users who removed their own stuff because they knew they were going to get investigated after the riots. So what the graph explains here is the ongoing planning of the riots happening primarily on Telegram. So first there's discussion about the need to cause this government to fall or cause an institutional rupture, which is a sort of code name for military intervention. And then there is a very interesting phenomenon, which is that on the sort of safe space that Telegram was outside of platform moderation, because it's not platform moderated, not significantly at least, they plan to use this kind of code name, which is Festa da Selma, for the riots. So we're going to Selma's party for the riots, wink, wink. And so they begin to use this code name to spread it to other platforms that are more moderated in order to evade moderation. So let me see if I can, no. Oh, here, okay. So what does Twitter looks like? And this is already by the time that Elon Musk had been in power, mind you. So some posts are removed by so-called shown down, right? The things in black here. So there's this person here that is inciting again a coup d'état, and this is removed by the Supreme Court. This, however, is suspended by Twitter, and this is still online. So for the most part, the things that incite the assemblage to go to the right remain online, with a few exceptions. There are just a few things that are suspended, and the minority of things that are suspended by the Supreme Court. Then Windows, no. Okay, now Facebook and Instagram, it's more or less the same story, except that they use flagging much more. So for the most part, these calls for the riot are still online, except for a number of posts that are about other topics that are just flagged. So this example here is just flagged. Thanks. I'm just going to skip YouTube really quickly. And then, so this is just an overall result of what was moderated and what wasn't and how. And what we find is that for the most part, the calls for military intervention or strikes in favor of a military coup or calls to join the January riots remained, at least half of them were online. The other part were deleted, or they were deleted by the users themselves for fear of reprisal. And the things that were mostly labeled or deleted in Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram were allegations of electoral fraud, were not necessarily calls for military intervention. So this is what then I referred in the title as a sort of normative dislocation or dislocated moderation, in the sense that what was supposed to be moderated as by sort of speech norm traditions in Brazil were not exactly moderated. What was moderated instead was what was already moderated in the experience of the US elections, which was these allegations of fraud. So what's the aftermath? Very quickly. Well, in Brazil, then later they introduced a bill to try to reinforce moderation. They call this the anti-fake news law bill. So it was a sort of anti-disinformation bill. But a lot of platforms were very opposed to it. So they also put banners on their own website. So if you would log in Google in Brazil, it would show something like the anti-fake news laws proposal can increase public confusion on what is and isn't true in Brazil. So they have very active lobbying. And then, of course, this happened more recently, is that Elon Musk decided to sort of take revenge on having been pushed so much to moderate the elections, and publishes what he calls the Twitter files that reveal how much the Supreme Court was involved in pushing them to moderate content. And then the Judicial Committee here in the US takes up this concern by Elon Musk and sort of presents it or frames it as a problem of censorship. So in the sense, it also complicates the narrative of moderation across states and across understandings of what should and should not be moderated. So just to conclude really quickly, I think it's fair to say with that, US-based social media platforms have sort of destabilized a relatively fragile set of speech norms in Brazil in a number of ways, right? Because they have another set of normative standards, and also because they broaden the sort of the combat field between different political actors in Brazil. And so in a sense, it would be interesting to, as other people yesterday have mentioned, consider a local legal platform structure for writing joint speech moderation policies, also with the help of civil society and legal representatives. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all the lectures. It's now 30 and we have